Great. So thanks again for the friendly and warm presentation, and let me also thanks organizers for having me here today. Of course, I regret I didn't have the opportunity to join you in person, but I mean, hopefully we will have chance to meet sooner rather than later. So going to my speech without losing too much time. My speech today focuses on one of the oldest and still unrealized pipeline project in the Eurasian area. This is the so-called Trans-Caspian gas pipeline, a quite ambitious project. In its initial design, it should have carried around 30 billion cubic meter, more or less half of Italian annual consumption, just to provide you with an idea. And I'm at linking gas-rich Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan and through Azerbaijan to Western market through the Caspian Sea. So after many years of kind of silence around the project, two sets of events resulted in a kind of return of interest in the realization of the Trans-Caspian pipeline. The first one is the kind of new diplomatic entente among the Caspian littoral states. The Caspian littoral states in general and between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan in particular. And they resolve also to work together along with Turkey, by the way, toward the construction of the pipeline. The second event, needless to say, is the urgency for the EU to reinvent its gas import sources and channels in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, resulting itself in the decision to end gas import from Russia by 2027. So such an urgency ended up in breathing new life into infrastructure projects, which until the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, proved to be not solid enough either economically or politically to overcome the, let's say, study phase. So the idea here is to try to analytically assess the chance for this decade-long project to be realized in the current energy scenario, a scenario which is shaped first and foremost by the reorientation of the regional gas trade flows. So to do that, I'll be focusing first on what kind of impact we may see the conflict in Ukraine is having on both energy economics and energy politics on the one hand, and on the other hand, I will be focusing on if and how this changing scenario may impact on the realization of the pipeline. So, starting from the first point, repercussions of the conflict in Ukraine. Let's say that beyond the short-term repercussions of the conflict, on both, of course, availability and prices of natural gas, of which we are all well aware, I guess. If we take a quick look at energy politics, in the Eurasian area, what we see very, how to say, briefly, is its main gas importer, namely the EU as a whole, attempting to get rid of its main supplier, namely Russia. And in the same and opposite way, we do have the main Eurasian gas producer progressively losing its main market, the EU, and therefore in need to find new ways to protect its own energy security through the diversification of export. The combined result of this is basically the already mentioned reorientation of gas flow, shaped by I would say analogous yet opposite diversification challenge. So the need for the EU to diversify supplier and Russia to diversify markets. A challenge which, by the way, it's all the more deep as their infrastructure link are rigid. First of all, pipeline. So behind, let's say, this rather, I would say, also obvious and superficial picture, we may descry another rather important trend from my point of view, which helps us in looking at the current crisis under another perspective. So the idea here is basically that the energy crisis resulting from the war has, of course, deeper roots. The EU and its member states got to the crisis basically unprepared. And this was the result of two sets of reasons. First, we got to 2022, to February 2022, coming from an era which may call of gas abundance, an era of excess, in a way, of offer of gas, where there were no incentives at all for operators in the market to invest in new production or in new transportation capacity. I mean, energy policy, this is the classical problem resulting from the cyclical nature of energy investment. On the other hand, EU was unprepared also as the result, and this is the most important point from my view, as a result of what we may call the interdependence illusion. What I would like to say here is that the Russian invasion of Ukraine marked first and foremost the crisis of the idea, or the illusion, if you prefer, that the responsibility for defining relation with Russia could be left primarily to the market. That is, that the role, let's say, of politics, the role of diplomacy could be almost entirely left to the market, building upon exactly the idea of interdependence between consumer and producers. So, in a way, in February 2022, we as Europeans suddenly discovered two main things. First, that the market first approach to relation with Russia, and thus interdependence, was incapable of deterring Moscow from pursuing a kind of regressive and revolutionary approach to international relations, just to borrow words from Bobolo. Secondly, that this the resulting business as usual approach to Russia, which, by the way, was the rule also after 2014 Crimean crisis, ended up in funding the war in Ukraine. And if we wanted a broader look, also in fostering the Russian regressive and revolutionary approach itself. Therefore, we may say that the Ukrainian conflict resulted in the need to rethink, reimagine the relation and the balance between market and diplomacy, market and politics, limiting the role of the former and giving somehow space back to the latter. So actually, from my point of view, this is the most important lesson, of course, as far as energy politics is concerned, resulting from the war. And remaining on this dichotomy between market and diplomacy and moving to the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline, what is interesting noting about it is that the whole Trans-Caspian gas pipeline saga, which, by the way, started in Bill Clinton's White House before moving to Brussels at the beginning of the century, is that this dichotomy between market and politics helps in a way clarifying the reason behind the failure to build the gas pipeline. Or if you want, if you prefer, it is exactly in the mismatch between market and diplomacy where the primary reason for the lack of realization of the pipeline lies. So, to put it in simple words, when market conditions were favorable for the construction of the pipeline, political ones were not, and the other way around. This is why I call it a kind of mismatch. The first case, so favorable market condition, but not diplomatic one, was the case during the first decade of the century. In this phase, and on the backdrop of the attempt of the EU to diversify its import gas supply channel and sources, the pipeline was seen as a natural segment of the so-called Southern gas corridor of the European Union. Still, regional diplomacy didn't help in that, because we may discuss this later if you want, so-called Turkmenistan defensive stance. So this is a label given by European Commission, not by me. So resulting from Ashgabat's unwillingness to get involved in infrastructure building or to open up its gas sector to international investors. Resulting also from Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan incapability to solve their maritime border disputes in the Caspian, but also, not less importantly, from the staunch opposition to the project on the part of Russia and Iran, which could count on not so well defined, let's say, legal status of the Caspian. So in such a circumstances, EU efforts, even the most advanced and unprecedented one, we may discuss the kind of political investment that the European Commission did make in the realization of the process, were nevertheless doomed to fail. This kind of window of opportunity closed in the second decade of the century, exactly as we entered an era of gas abundance. Such an era made investment in huge transportation projects commercially unfeasible. And also, this is quite important point, gave birth to a kind of producer syndrome instead of the classical consumer one shaping energy politics. So in the abundance era, the burden to invest in infrastructure was no more on the shoulders of the consumers eager to reach the field, but rather on producers' shoulder eager to save or improve their quota in the market. It's not by chance that if we have a southern gas corridor today, it's just because of Azerbaijani, so producing country investment. Otherwise, we in Italy would have no Azerbaijani gas here, and also Turkish investment there. Still, so in such circumstances, even at a time when Caspian regional diplomacy started sending quite encouraging signals about the possibility to solve the long-standing dispute that previously hindered the construction of the pipeline. I'm referring to the 2018 Convention on the Caspian Sea legal status, as well as on the 2021 solution of the border dispute between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. So these kind of signals came definitely too late, because the implementation of such ambitious infrastructure projects based on long-term commitment between exporters and importers were no longer consistent with market conditions, shaped by growing flexibility, growing diversification, growing interconnection, quite important from the European point of view. So also maybe because aware of this kind of limitation, and perhaps even in a way this illusion following years of unsuccessful attempt to open up the corridor, the EU itself in 2021 even decided to remove the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline from the project of common interest list, which may be supported also financially by the European Union. So on this...
sorry, Carlo, try to go to conclusions within 1 minute.
Okay, I will take it too, if I can. So the Ukrainian conflict just apparently bridged this mismatch. Because the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the breakdown in energy relations between Russia and the EU resulted in a conjunctural crisis for the EU, which nonetheless doesn't change the broader structural trend of the gas sector. We do have a short-term urgency to adapt our energy import system to this new challenge, but this does not change structural parameters of the gas sector, which is shaped by an offer that not the need to reinvent the way to import it, it's still sufficient to satisfy European demand. So, and going to the conclusion, there is a clear need to define a new balance between market and diplomacy. And since the beginning of the war, diplomacy or politics somehow recovered some ground it had lost in the previous decade. But still, the market rules and logic are still in control of the energy game. So the perfect storm now affecting European gas market, although impactful, of course, should be considered as merely conjunctural, not able to affect the market fundamentals, which still impede the Trans-Caspian pipeline to turn from dream to reality. In 2 words, it will not be the current gas crisis in Europe, nor the positive signals coming from the Caspian energy diplomacy to breathe new life into this long-standing attempt to build the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline. Thanks for the attention.